Shalom Aleichem. Today is Yom HaMishi b'Shabbat, Aleph b'Mar Heshwan Tavshin Pehei, Rosh Chodesh Mar Heshwan, corresponding to the 23rd of October 2025. The Minyanam. We are in Hilchot Kriyat Shema, Rambam, Perek Aleph, Halacha Hey. כשהקורא קורא קריאת שמע, מברך לפניה ולאחריה. So whenever we discuss performing this mitzvah of Kriyat Shema, although Rambam previously said at the beginning of this perek that Kriyat Shema consists of 3 parakim from the Torah, 3 parshiot, as Rambam said here in Halacha Bet, Umau Koreh Shalosh Parshiot Elu. Now Rambam is telling you a new piece of information, which is that these parshiot are read together with barachot. There are barachot that go with it. So whenever we speak of this mitzvah, we refer to both the barachot and the parshiot. כשהקורא קורא קריאת שמע, מברך לפניה ולאחריה. ביום מברך 2 לפניה ואחת לאחריה. The morning, 2 barachot before Kriyat Shema and 1 after. ולילה מברך 2 לפניה ו2 לאחריה. And now Rambam explains or goes into detail. הלכה ברכה ראשונה שלפניה ביום יוצר אור, etc. as we know. שנייה לה אהבת עולם אהבתנו ולשלאחריה אמת ויציב. וברכה ראשונה שלפניה בלילה מעריב ערבים. שנייה לה אהבת עולם בית עמך ישראל אהבת. וברכה ראשונה של אחריה in the evening, אמת ואמונה, שנייה לה השכיבנו. We see in the Talmud Bavli that in the evening they said emet ve'emunah as opposed to emet ve'yatziv. That is absolutely true, and it's perfectly all right to do that, to say that. We also see in the Talmud Yerushalmi that they recited the same baracha morning and evening, emet ve'yatziv, without any change. So we continue. Halacha Zayin. ברכה ראשונה שלפניה בין ביום ובין בלילה פותח בה בברוך וחותם בברוך. So we begin with ברוך אתה השם, etc. יוצר אור וברך חושך, and we end with ברוך אתה השם יוצר המאורות, for example. And the same is true in the evening. We begin and end with ברוך, with the חתימה, ושאר ברכותיה חותם בכל אחת מהן בברוך, ואין להן פתיחה. Why not? Because these are known as a baracha hasamucha b'haverta. When you have a string of barachot, one after the other, even 2 is enough. Kal v'chomer, more than 2, such as in Shemona Esrei, you have one baracha followed by another baracha, etc., etc. The first always begins with baruch, and also ends with baruch, but the second, and in Shemona Esrei, for example, the second, the third, baracha, etc., do not. They end with the hatima, they do not begin with the hatima. And then the end of the last baracha, of course, has a hatima as well. That is the end of the Shemona Esrei. In the case of Birkot Kriyat Shema, it is the same. And that is what Rambam has just informed us. And now Rambam continues and tells you, where does this new idea of barachot come from? So Rambam says, barachot elu, which in some printing says now halacha heth, barachot elu, im shar kol ha-barachot, ha'aruchot, b'fi chol Yisrael. These barachot of Kriyat Shema. And the same is true for all the standard barachot that all of Am Yisrael knows and has grown up with almost from time immemorial. Rambam tells us, Ezra uveth dino tikenum, as it states mefurash in a number of places. For example, in the Barachot and the Bavli, Daf Lamed Gimel, I think it is, Ezra uveth dino tikenum, ואין אדם רשאי לפחות מהן ולא להוסיף עליהן. And one cannot decide, I will be a Hasid, Yesod Olam, and I will, instead of saying 2 barachot before Kriyat Shema, I will say 3. I have another idea, a very nice baracha that I came up with, and I will recite 3 barachot before and 1 after. As dalecha, you should know this is not to be done. This is not how the Torah works. The number of the barachot and the essence, the theme of each baracha was determined by the Chachamim, by Ezra uveth dino. All these takanot, all these such matters are always connected to and attributed to Ezra Sofer uveth dino. In other words, his talmidim, his colleagues. This is when, due to the diligent work of Ezra Sofer and his disciples and his followers and his colleagues, this is when the Torah was successfully rooted in the consciousness, in the minds, and in the daily practice and lives of the Jewish people on a broad scale. I cannot tell you for a fact that every single Jew in Yehuda in the time of Ezra Sofer, or a generation after Ezra Sofer, or in the time of Shimon and Tzaddik, or what have you, I cannot say to you that every Jew performed all of the mitzvot as Ezra and his talmidim and his colleagues instructed the people to do, but this became the norm. This became standard. It became ubiquitous. Rambam continues and tells you, Makom sheyitkinu lahtom bevaruch, eno rashai shelo lahtom. And not only the number of the barachot, and not only the theme and the idea of each baracha. You will note it doesn't say anything about the precise wording of the barachot. But the idea, the notion, the theme of each baracha and the number of the barachot were determined by the Chachamim at that time, which is near the beginning of Beit Sheni. Not only that, but also many of the other details as well, such as Makom sheyitkinu lahtom bevaruch, where they said you have to end with a chatima, and orashai shelo lahtom, one is not allowed to decide, I will change this basic format. The basic configuration of these things is fixed. Not the precise nusach, but the basic configuration is fixed. So in the morning, shtaim lefanah, hat lahareah. In the evening, shtaim lefanah, shtaim lahareah. So that is altogether 7 barachot during the day, as the Chachamim would doreh, sheva bayom hilauticha. And that is fixed, that is immutable. So you are bound to these basic rules and parameters. You cannot drop a chatima, you cannot add a chatima. Similarly, makom sheyitkinu shelo liftoach bevaruch eno rashai liftoach. ומקום שהתקינו לפתוח, אינו רשאי שלא לפתוח. כללו של דבר. So this is the rule, and this is the principle of the thing. כל המשנה ממטבע שטבעו חכמים בברכות, הרי זה טועה. Any person who changes any of these basic parameters of these takanot, of these barachot, It's not only the case here with regards to Birkot Kriyat Shema, it's also true with regards to Tefillah, Shmoneh Esrei, and other things as well, like Birkat HaMazon. All these basic mitzvot and these basic and fundamental and regular barachot, Kol HaMeshaneh Mimatbe'a Sheta'u Chachamim, from the configuration, the system, and the order and the essential parameters of these mitzvot, of these barachot. Anyone who changes any of these things, harei ze to'eh. V'chozer u'mevarech kamatbe'a. Not only is he mistaken, he was not yotzeh yodeh hova. He must now repeat that baracha. So if he recited Kriyat Shema with all kinds of newfangled barachot in terms of the hatimot or lack of hatimot, in terms of the petihot or lack thereof, he would have to repeat Kriyat Shema with the barachot properly. Chozer mevarech kamatbe'a. V'chol she'eno omer emet u'yasiv b'shacharit. V'emet emunah, or as we said in Eretz Yisrael, emet u'yasiv would also apply ba'arvit. Lo yasa yadei havato. So Rambam stresses here that which is also stressed in the Talmud, that we are required to recite and to speak of at length, not briefly, not just in one pasuk, but at length, to speak about Yetziat Mitzrayim every day, twice a day, b'shacharit or b'arvit, morning and evening. If it was sufficient simply to recite the pasuk at the end of Parashat Tzitzit, Ani Adonai Elohechem asher hoseti atchem eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem Elohim, Ani Adonai Elohechem, where we do mention Yetziat Mitzrayim, then this statement would not follow. But the meaning is, or the intention of the Chachamim was, that we have to be ma'arich. We have to be more detailed and spend more time on mentioning Yetziat Mitzrayim, because it is so important, so central to everything about the Torah. The Yetziat Mitzrayim is the most central and fundamental concept and principle of all of the Torah. As Rabbi Yehuda Halevi points out in Sefer HaKuzari, when he explains to the Melech HaKuzarim, he says, I did not say to you, or the king asks him, why don't you say to me, I believe in the God who created heaven and earth, etc., etc. And he replies, he says, well, that is most definitely true. But in that case, if I were just to tell you that is the first principle of Judaism, then all human beings would have to follow Judaism. And the Torah was not given to all of humanity, or at least not all of the Torah was not given to all of humanity. The Torah has what to say, and has teachings and instruction for all of humanity, yes, but Torah Moshe Rabbeinu, in other words, what we call Judaism generally, is not for all peoples. It's not designed for all peoples. A non-Jew who wishes to join the Jewish people may do so if he is willing to accept upon himself the entire Torah, which he is not required to do. But if he wishes to, he may. But he has to be it has to be done for the right reasons, for sincere reasons, and with full intention and full cognizance of what this involves. You will note, however, that Rambam does not say that it is a misvat aseh min Torah to mention Yetziat Mitzrayim every day. That Rambam does not write. Rashi does. That is the understanding, at least, of a number of Rishonim, when it says Meth Yasiv min Doraita, that mentioning Yetziat Mitzrayim at length is min Torah. Rambam, at least, does not understand it to mean that this is a misvah aseh min Torah, that you must do so. But rather, he would tell you it's an asmachta based on Pesukim in the Torah, so it's referred to also as something min Torah. As Rabbi David Friedman Mikarlin points out in Teshuvah, his understanding is that, according to Rambam at least, the mitzvah is to do those mitzvot which we perform in order to remember Yetziat Mitzrayim, in order that it be ever present in our minds. So one example is tefillin. If the Torah says explicitly, as it does, that the mitzvah of tefillin is to remind us of Hashem and His Torah and of Yetziat Mitzrayim, then by wearing tefillin, we are remembering Yetziat Mitzrayim. That is why it follows that one is required, as the Bach writes, for example, one is required, it's not just rasui, it's not just desirable, it is a requirement that one remembers the Yetziat Mitzrayim when wearing tefillin or when putting on tefillin.
Rabbi,
Yes.
you briefly mentioned how Ezra and his Beth Din enacted this and made the rest of the Jews follow this. In general, we seem to know very little about that historical period, both from Chazal and other sources. Is there any reason for that? Or is there anything that we can learn about how the Torah Shebaal Peh looked at that time, based on the limited information we had?
It is true that we have relatively little information, but we do see certain interesting things, even in the Tanakh, regarding this period. For example, let me open up my Tanakh here. All right, so if we look here at Sefer Nehemiah, the end of Perek Zayin, it says, وَيَشْرِبُوا هَكَأَنِيمْ وَالْوِئِيمْ وَهَالشُّعَرِيمْ وَهَالْمَشَرَرِيمْ ومن העם והנתינים וכל ישראל בעריהם ויגע החודש השביעי ובני ישראל בעריהם. All right, so we're told that some Jews have returned. Here we just had prior to these psukim, we had a lengthy census account of the Jews who had returned, etc. And then it goes on to say in Perek Heth, now, and we know that Ezra's job description, as he had been instructed by Artaxerxes, the Persian king, and he had been given authority to disseminate the Torah, and not just to teach and disseminate, but also to enforce the Torah. He was as it were, a Supreme Court judge. He had legal authority, but he lacked political and military power, and he was not a practical. Strikes me, Ezra Sofer was not a particularly practical, pragmatic, down-to-earth individual, as often great Chachamim are not. Whereas Nehemiah was such a person, and Nehemiah arrived with other extra letters of marque. That's MARQE and royal imprimatur and what have you, and also a limited military force. So he was able to enforce, which is necessary when you have people who do not want to do the right thing. Sometimes they need to be forced to do the right thing, or at least prevented from causing others not to do the right thing. Especially if the Jewish people have enemies, then you cannot rely on your powers of persuasion alone. So Nehemiah arrived. He saw the situation was not good. Ezra was there before him, but the situation was not very good, both politically in terms and vis-a-vis their relations with the nations round about, the Moavim and Aravim and Shomronim and all manner of tribes and groups that had invaded our land during our absence. And the Jews were threatened by these people constantly, as we see in Sefer Ezra and Nehemiah. Another important reason why everyone must study Sefer Ezra and Sefer Nehemiah. Very, very important. And the number of parallels to our current situation are amazing, very illuminating. Another thing that Nehemiah understood was he was also an Ish Torah. He was very much not only in favor of, but he was very active in disseminating the Torah and helping, assisting Ezra perform this job of his. And see, this is what we see here in Perek Het. It says, "Vayasfu kol ha'am ki'ish echad el horehov asher lifnei she'ar hamayim." So they announced the general, a public gathering. "Vayomeru le'Ezra hasofer lehavi sefer Torat Moshe." And Ezra was told to bring the Torah, Sefer Torah, asher tziwa Adonai et Yisrael. Vayavi Ezra kohen et Torah lifnei ha'kahal me'ish v'ad isha. And everyone was gathered there, men and women, v'chol mevin lishmo'a, anyone who could understand, which includes children from a certain age upwards. B'yom ehad lachodesh hashvi'i. So this is on which day? Rosh Hashanah. ויקרא בו לפני הרחוב אשר לפני שער המים מן האור עד מחצית היום. So if you think your local shul is long-winded, well, here it went from first light till midday. So it's quite a long time. נגד האנשים והנשים והמבינים ואוזני כל העם על ספר התורה. And everyone, all the people were instructed to listen, and the Torah was read before them in public. ויעמוד עזרא הסופר על מגדל עץ אשר עשו לדבר, and here we have explicit description of some kind of bama, some kind of platform, some kind of stage being built for this purpose, where Ezra could stand above the people and read loudly from the Torah, and everyone would be able to hear. ויעמוד אצלו מתתיה ושמע ועניה ואוריה והנקיה ומעשיה על ימינו ומשמאלו פדיה ומישאל ומלכיה וחשום וחשבדנה זכריה משורם. These were apparently Chachamim. Many of them were very likely Leviim, and they were almost certainly his Talmidim also. So this is actually a list of some of Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, apparently. ויפתח עזרא הסופר לעיני כל העם. So he opens the Sefer Torah, כי מעל כל העם היה. So we hear from all this that he was above them, and so he could be seen and heard by all. וכפתחו עמדו כל העם. So the first thing is, either the people have been instructed to do so, or they understood without being told that when the Sefer Torah is brought out and opened up, they should stand. So the people had at least some understanding of the importance and the kedusha, the holiness of the Torah, and they must show it great respect, and they were in awe. ויברך עזרא את אדוני האלוהים הגדול, ויענו כל העם, אמן אמן, במו על ידיהם, ויגדו וישתחוו לאדוני אפיים ארצה. So what do we see? Ezra, before he begins to read from the Torah, he recites some kind of beracha. We don't know exactly the words that he spoke, but he says, "Vayivarech Ezra et Adonai ha'Elohim ha'gadol," and this pasuk is brought by the Chachamim as a makor for the beracha before one reads from the Torah. And the whole concept of reading the Torah b'tzibur is mentioned for the first time here. So here we have mefurash in the Tanakh clear indications of the beginnings of such practices in Am Yisrael. We don't see this prior to this time, except for the one reference in Sefer Yehezkel where it says that the Zekenim came to Yehezkel on Shabbat, and they were speaking to him, and he spoke to them. One imagines they also read from the Torah, but very likely, though it doesn't say so explicitly, or he taught them various things. But at least they came to speak with him, to hear him. They had some kind of convocation. But that's only a fleeting reference. Here it's much more explicit and much more specific. It says also, Pasuk Zayin, V'yeshua uvani v'sherevya Yamin Akub Shabbatai Hodaya Ma'asaya Kalita Azariah Yozavad Hanan Pelaya V'Halviim. I think the word Halviim here probably refers to other, in other words, additional Leviim. In other words, many of these people that were Leviim apparently. Mevinim et ha'am la Torah, they were explaining to the people, V'ha'am al umdam. And now the Pasuk goes on to explain what exactly they did. V'yikru'u v'sefer Torah ha'Elohim mefurash. Ezra would read or maybe someone else, maybe he wasn't the only one who read from the Sefer Torah, he would read from the Torah, Wasom Sechel, Oyavinu Bamikra, and they would explain to them, and Chazal learned from here the concept of, or bring a proof of the fact that it should be a Targum for the Torah. From these words here, the Meforash is the Mikra, Wasom Sechel is the also the Ta'amim and the Diktukim, in other words, how to read it. And Ta'amim Mikra, in other words, Oyavinu Bamikra. Tamei Mikra, in the sense that there was a tradition how to read the text and where to stop and where to start, and where one word belongs to the next word, where it does not belong to the next word, not necessarily in the sense of Tamei Mikra exactly as we understand it today, but that's the general idea. And the Targum, and therefore Vayavinu B'Mikra, because they didn't necessarily understand all the Lashon of the Torah, or maybe they didn't understand any of the Lashon of the Torah. It's difficult to know. Some perhaps understood some, others understood more, others less. The majority of there were Chachamim and there were Kohanim and Leviim. They were the main Lomodei Torah. They were Tofasei Torah. So and it goes on to say further that in Pasuk Tel Zayin, وَيَسْأُوا هَعَمْ, this is on Rosh Hashanah, وَيَسْأُوا هَعَمْ وَيَوِيُّ وَيَعْسُوا لَهَمْ سُكَّوْت إِيش عَلْ גגו ובחסרותיהם ובחסרות בית האלוהים וברחוב שער המים וברחוב שער אפרים. So Yerushalayim was full of Sukkoth on the rooftops and on of the houses which were flat, as Rashi stresses in his Perush on Masechet Sukkah. Rashi there stresses to the average Jew who was reading his Perush in northern France or in Germany in his day, he says their roofs were not like our roofs, which are slanted, and you can't build a sukkah on that. Their roofs were flat, which was a chidush to people in Western Europe in Rashi's day. وَيَعْسُوا كَلَّ הקהל השבים מן השבי סוכות وَيَشَvُوا בSukkot, and all the people they had been instructed what to do, and they did so, and they built Sukkot. כי לא עשו מימי יהושע בן נון כן בני ישראל. There was never a Sukkot like from the time of Yehoshua ben Nun until this time. That's a long time. We're talking about nearly 1,000 years. עד היום ההוא ותהי שמחה גדולה מאוד. And it goes on, it says again, ויקרא בספר תורת האלוהים יום ביום. מן היום הראשון עד היום האחרון. So here you have also Kriyat Torah every day of Sukkot. מפורש in the Tanakh. ויעשו הר שבעת ימים וביום השמיני עשרת כמשפט. All right, so what do we see from all of this? We see that at this time, many of the things which we all know and are used to, and are basic aspects of daily Jewish existence, are mentioned here for the first time. So I think it was on the basis of these pesukim, these kinds of pesukim. There are others. And also a living tradition that was known to Am Yisrael and particularly amongst the Chachamim, that it was at this time, the days of Ezra and his followers, that these basic these basic formats and ideas and institutions began to become current and accepted and widespread. It began at that time. So that's why we find in the Talmud, the Rambam just told us now, that is Ezra Ovet Dino Tikenu. But we don't have specific references to. We don't have a list of Takanot of Ezra HaSofer and his Beit Din or anything like that. That we do not have. That is entirely true. So now we're Yanacha Tayet Ochet. Hikdim Baracha Sheniya LeBaracha Rishona. So we spoke before about when a person makes changes, either deliberately or without intention, to the essential fundamental format of and configuration of the brachot. he didn't begin with a hatima where he should have, or he ended where he should not have, etc. That's one kind of change. That's one kind of shinui min matbea chachamim shetaru chachamim. Here we have another kind of discussion, another type of change. If a person higdim baracha sheniya livracha rishona ben bayom ben balayla ben lefanea ben ahareya yatsa lefi she'en seder la barachot. So this is an important rule also to know. We just said before that kol mishana mim matbea shetaru chachamim. He who changes anything of these basic parameters, and anything that has to do with the basic configuration, how many barachot and what form they take, and when you begin with the hatima, when you end with the hatima, anyone who changes any of that must repeat everything. However, in other words, that's unacceptable. However, if a person recited the second baracha before Kriyat Shema, before the first one, and then read the first after the second, he reversed the order, whether in the morning or in the evening, ben lefana ben lahareya yatsa. That's okay. He said the chovah, because if you recited all these barachot, even though not in the proper order, yasate the chovah. Rambam continues, Vashaharit patach yoser or usiyem ma'ariv aravim lo yasa. If a person began in the morning to say Baruch atah Hashem yoser or uvorei hoshech oseh shalom, etc., and he said whatever he said, but at the end he got confused, and he ended by saying Baruch atah Hashem ha'ma'ariv aravim instead of yoser ha'me'oroth. Lo yasa. That is unacceptable. He has to repeat that bracha. Patach b'ma'ariv aravim v'yisiyem b'yoser or yasa. But the other way around, in the morning, it's acceptable. In other words, even if a person was confused and began the bracha in the morning with the bracha that he's supposed to say in the evening, so he began to say Hashem b'dvaro ma'ariv aravim, he didn't say anything that's not true. Hashem b'dvaro ma'ariv aravim, that's entirely true. Then that shevach is a shevach shel emet. It's a correct statement, and it recognizes Hashem's creation of and control of all the natural and astronomical processes that we witness. Now, what is kovea, the thing that makes the difference, is the ending. So if you began with the wrong beginning, but you ended with the correct ending, usiyem b'yoser or in the morning, yasa. So in the middle of the bracha, he realized, and he began to then switch the morning bracha, and he ended with the correct siyum, the correct chatima, yasa dechova. He doesn't have to repeat. V'chen ba'arvit, the same is true, and in the reverse. Im patach b'ma'ariv aravim, which is correct, v'siyem b'yoser or, which is not correct, lo yasa, because we go by the hatima. Patach b'yoser or v'siyem b'ma'ariv aravim, yasa, shekol ha'berachot holachot ahar hatimathon. So if a person follows even if he makes a mistake, but he returns to the proper format and he ends with the correct hathima, yasai dechova. Halakha te'ef yod. Ezohu zaman kriyat Shema balayla. Now kriyat Shema is a mitzvah, like many mitzvot, that has that is time sensitive. There is a window of time for the recitation of Kriyat Shema. What is the zman ba'arvit balayla? Niswatha misha'af yisiat ha'kochavim ad hasi halayla, until the end of until midnight. Midnight being, for our purposes, the midpoint between sunset and sunrise. That is lechatchila, says Rambam. Ve'im avar ve'iher ve'kara ad shelo ola amud hashahar yasa yedeh havato. If a person, for whatever reason, did not read Kriyat Shema shel Arvit in the first half of the night, and did so later, up until dawn, yasa yedeh havato, he performed the mitzvah. Shelo amru ad hasot ela larhik min ha'peshia. The Lashon of the Mishneh is Larhik et ha'adam min ha'avera, but it means the same thing. In other words, we're not talking about a person who intends to not recite Kriyat Shema, but Peshi'ah. Peshi'ah means, well, literally in modern Hebrew, it means a criminal act. But it is criminal in the sense that a person was not acting correctly and properly and responsibly. In other words, if a person says, as it says in the Talmud in Barachot Daf Daled, Lemashal, if a person decides that, well, I'll have a nap first, and then I'll wake up, and then I'll say Kriyat Shema later, because right now I'm very tired, very drowsy, whatever it is, that is Peshi'ah. In other words, that is Karov Lehefsed Gadol. That is very likely to end up not very good at all, because the person is very likely to not wake up when he thought he might wake up. And therefore it's called Peshi'ah. In other words, it's acting irresponsibly. And that's why the Chachamim speak there about not doing certain things, such as eating a meal or having a nap or what have you before reading Kriyat Shema in the evening. I should also point out that this, what Rambam just wrote here, that Miswafa Misha'at Yitziat HaKochavim Ad Hasi Ha'Layla as Lechat Chilan B'di Avad Ala Rosh HaShachar. That is actually, that is the opinion of the Rif and the Rambam. But the truth is that it's not entirely, it doesn't entirely fit the Pshat, at least of the Talmud Bavli, interestingly enough. It Dafka does fit the Pshat of the Talmud Yerushalmi, but not the Talmud Bavli. Because let's see if I can call it up here just a moment. You should be able to see the Berachot Daf Het Amud Bet in the Talmud Bavli, and here, over here, where my marker is, Omar Rav Yehuda Amar Shemuel, Halacha K'Rabban Gamliel. In the Mishnah we had three opinions, Rabbi Eliezer, Chachamim, and Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel says Zman Kriyat Shema is Ad Amud HaShachar. And from what the Talmud Bavli says earlier in this perek, it seems that Rabban Gamliel was not of the opinion that one has to recite Kriyat Shema by Hasoth, by midnight. If Shmuel then comes along and says, and this is exactly the classic statement of an Amora, Amar Shmuel, what does he say? We have a Mishnah, you know what the Mishnah says, and I'm telling you, Halacha K'Rabban Gamliel. So what does that mean? The pshat is that there's no siyag, there's no requirement to read Kriyat Shema before midnight. You can read Kriyat Shema all night long, l'chatchila. So if you think you're going to be up till 2 a.m., 3 a.m., whatever, and that's what you want to do, you want to read before you go to sleep, b'vakasha, no problem, even though midnight was at 12 or 11:30 or whatever it was. But according to Hachamim, that's not acceptable. You have to read by Ad Hasoth, because that's what the Mishnah says. Hachamim omrim Ad Hasoth. The pshat of Lichora, what I would say it's more than Lichora. The pshat of what this statement of Shmuel states is that the halacha is K'Rabban Gamliel lechalutin, legamre. And this is how all Geonei Bavel understood it. So this is how you find it in the Halachot Gedolot, in Perushim of certain Geonim. This is what we find. But it's not interesting, it's not what Rif and Rambam write, so just you should be aware of that fact. Rambam's next statement is Halacha Yod Aleph, or Yod. הקורא קריאת שמע של ערבית, אחר שעולה עמוד השחר, קודם הנס החמה, לא יצא ידי חובתו. A person who read קריאת שמע של ערבית, the night of the night, but he didn't read all night, and he reads it, or he doesn't also read it before Amud HaShachar, which is first light in the east. The first light that you see in the east, that's Amud HaShachar. That's about, on an average day, shall we say, an hour and 12 minutes or something like that, an hour and a quarter, sometimes a bit less, depending on the time of the year, before sunrise. If a person did not read all night long, and now first light has come and gone, the sun has not risen, but he has not yet read Kriyat Shema Shel Arvit, Lo Yasa De Chovato, even if he reads it now, Ela Im Ken Haya Anus, unless he was anus, which means that there were reasons why he could not read before this time, such as kehon shikor, whatever reason he got drunk. Not a good idea, but it can happen. What do you do if that was the situation? Well, if you wake up, you wake from your drunken stupor at this point in the very early morning, you can still recite Kriyat Shema, and it counts for Kriyat Shema Shel Arvit, because it is not yet really day, not fully day yet. Or Chole, a person who was ill, he was, let's say, had a very high fever or something, and now the fever has broken. He's able to recite Kriyat Shema, then he must do so. And if it was in such a circumstance, he is Yotzei Yedei Chova. But if he was not, then he's not Yotzei Yedei Chova. This is also something which is not necessarily so obviously comprehensible. How is it possible that a certain person who was, let's say, ill and did not read Kriyat Shema till this point in time, who now does read Kriyat Shema Shel Arvit, he's Yotzei Yedei Chova Kriyat Shema Shel Arvit, but another person who, Mishum Peshi'ah, he decided to, whatever he was doing, he was busy. He couldn't be bothered. He decided at the last moment, now he decided, I really should read Kriyat Shema Shel Arvit. And he does so. He wasn't ill. He wasn't anus. He was Peshi'ah. But now he's read it. How can it be that this person sitting next to him read Kriyat Shema now was Yotzei Yedei Chova, and he, sitting right next to the same person, is not Yotzei Yedei Chova? That's not very clear at all. But that's what Rambam says. And this is what the Rif says. This is what the Rif says, but it's not clear that's how we should understand the Sugya, the Baraita, from which this is learnt. It's not clear that's the only way of understanding it, not at all. And that is why the Baal HaMaor disagrees, for example.
Is it not the case that the Yerushalmi has a similar discussion about Kriyat Shema during the morning or during the day, and it says en halacha v'shocheach? There's no such idea that if you forgot to say Shema by a certain point, you can say it later, but if you didn't, you can't say it later. And the conclusion there is that it's just to be mezarez people to say it earlier.
Exactly. So to say en halacha ken el b'shocheach is another way of saying zeruz. This is to tell people you must not rely on this. You must not make this a habit. But technically speaking, to say that two Jews read Kriyat Shema at the same time, and the only difference being that one did so deliberately and one did so under duress, or for other reasons which he could not think, reasons beyond his control. That is not an easy thing to necessarily to understand or to explain. But this is what the Rif writes, and the Rambam takes this from the Rif. All right, we continue. This is, again, it doesn't say exactly in so many words, it doesn't say anus only, but it does say in the Sugya over there in Masechet Berachot that when a person reads Kriyat Shema Shel Arvit at this late hour, that is to say, after the first light has appeared and the sky is beginning to light up, but it's still before the sun rises, one recites Kriyat Shema with the brachot, with the exception of Birkat Hashkivenu, because Hashkivenu refers to a time when people are generally going to sleep, and usually this is not a time for going to sleep. This is a time when people wake up, and it's therefore inappropriate to say so. And it's also the theme, the concept of the bracha, which is Hashem Yishmor Alenu mi Pahat Laila, mi Lesatim, mi Islamo Nazis, and the like, and wild animals, which are, I would say, more or less identical. In fact, I think I take my chances with the wild animals first. Hashkivenu at such a time is not appropriate when the day has already basically begun and everyone's getting up. To say Hashkivenu now is strange. In other words, the bracha refers to the general reality of the world in which one finds oneself, and not on one's personal reality. So even if you were up all night for whatever reason and now you intend to go to sleep, you still don't say Hashkivenu, because it's not Hashkiveni, it's Hashkivenu. And this is not the time for reciting this bracha. So that has to do with Kriyat Shema Shel Arvit. What about Kriyat Shema Shel Shaharit? Rambam says, Halacha Yod Aleph Yod Bet, U'ezahu Zamana Bayom. Miswatha Shiatchil Likroth Kodem Hanes Haba. one should begin reading Kriyat Shema before sunrise, a little before, כדי שיגמור לקרות ולברך ברכה אחרונה עד עם הנס החמה, I should say, so that one will end the last baracha, the baracha after Kriyat Shema, as the sun is beginning to rise, and then one begins to recite. That is the ideal time for tefillah, and that is in order to be somech gura letefillah. Shiur zeh, and if you want to know how long before the sun rises should you begin to recite Kriyat Shema, Rambam means to say. How long before the sun, in your estimation, will rise? You say you don't know precisely, but you can estimate it's going to be 5 minutes, 10 minutes. You should try and begin, Rambam says, Shiur zeh kamo isur sha'ah, a tenth of an hour, which is 6 minutes. And this is the correct nusach, even though there is another nusach where instead of isur it says shiur, and that's just confusion, as the Kesef Mishneh also writes. Shiur zeh kamo isur sha'ah kodem sheta'aleh hashemesh. So if you begin reciting Kriyat Shema slowly with the brachot, 6 or so minutes before the sun rises, you will end, if you're reading at a reasonable pace, not too fast, not too slow, you will end at the right time in order to begin reciting. First of all, you will end just as the sun is rising, and you will be able to begin the tefillah, which Rambam hasn't mentioned here, but there is an inyan to do so, as we will see. You'll be able to begin the tefillah exactly with the Hanes Ahama, with the sunrise. I can tell you that once upon a time, many, many moons ago, I knew a certain individual, actually Gera Hossid, for what it's worth, and a very interesting person, actually, and quite open-minded and learned in various ways, but he managed to misunderstand this line of the Rambam completely, because when I was speaking to him once about various matters, it became apparent that he believed that Hanes Hama was 6 minutes before the sun actually rises, before we see it rise. That's called Hanes Hama. So he said all the minyanim, he was telling me how all the minyanim that think they're davening Kiwathikin with the Hanes Hama are all wrong, because they should be arriving at Gal Yisrael or Thur Yisrael B'Go'alo and beginning the Shmoneh Esrei 6 minutes before the sun rises and not as the sun rises. And I said, well, that's the first time I've ever heard that. Where did you get this from? Yilamdenu Rabbanu. So he said to me, well, it's in the Rambam. I said, really? I've never seen that in the Rambam. Please show it to me. So he opened up the Rambam. I actually remember, well, he didn't open up the Rambam, but he quoted this Rambam. We were actually sitting together and driving in a car, I believe, as I recall. And he said, it says there, Rambam says, Shiur zeh kamo isur sha'ah. In other words, Rambam says here, Kadeh shi'igmor likroth levarech berachach ro im hanes hama. And now he understood, the Rambam was telling you, what is hanes hama? The halachic hanes hama is not what you see, not the observable sunrise. Ela shiur zeh kamo isur sha'ah kodem sheta'aleh hashemesh. So I said to him, Yididi wa haviri, you misunderstood the Rambam. What Rambam is trying to tell you is not that the sunrise is not the sunrise. That's ludicrous. Sunrise is exactly what every normal human being understands it to be. When the sun appears first, the first point of the sun appears on the eastern horizon, that's sunrise. However, Rambam is telling you roughly how long you should pace yourself and have an idea of when the sunrise is going to be, and begin about a tenth of an hour, 6 minutes before that, and you'll be pretty much on target. Which also gives you an idea of how long reciting Kriyat Shema should be. So it shouldn't be 2 minutes or 3 minutes. It should be about 6 minutes, which is fine. Makes perfect sense if you, as I understand it, if you recite it as a normal person would. If Yasar de Hovato. Now Rambam here says you can read Kriyat Shema after the sun rises as well. And you are Yosef de Hova. But that's not ideal. According to Rambam, this is only for someone who, this is only with the avad. L'chatchila, you must read Kriyat Shema according to the Rambam up to the time of the sunrise of Henes Ahama. And therefore, if you are a Rambamist and you wish to live in a place like Norway, you've got a problem, at least in the summer months, because the sun rises, let's say, at, depending where, 3:30 or 3, or depending which part of Norway you're in. In those climes, you won't get much sleep, especially if you try and read Kriyat Shema Shel Avit at Tzeta Kochavim in the evening. In some places, the sun doesn't even set. In other places, it sets technically, but the sky doesn't become dark. You won't even see stars. So it's altogether not a good idea to live in Scandinavia if you wish to be a Jew. Not recommended. The same, of course, is true in other places, such as the Antarctic or what have you. But that's just by the by. Eretz Yisrael, as Rabbi Yehuda Halevi points out in Sefer HaKuzari, is in an ideal location in terms of weather patterns, length of the day, soil, and what have you. That is, for those who don't know, that is one of the reasons, the main reason, basically, for the phenomenon that we know as the Vikings. The Viking raids and invasions of the British Isles and other countries in the world was a factor, was brought about by the fact that the soil in those countries is very poor. Agriculture is very difficult. There's little arable land, and the land is not very fertile. And once the population began to expand, they had no choice. They had to find somewhere else to move. One of the main things they were seeking was fertile arable land, and that's one reason that England appealed to them. And of course, a bit of raiding and pillage and what have you never hurts also. So there you go. So Rambam says, Kriyat Shema lechatchila is only till Henes Ahama. Afterwards, it's with the avad ad shalosh sha'ot. So says Rambam. This too this can definitely be traced to the Yerushalmi, what Rambam says here. But lichora, it's not the pshat of what the Bavli says. In the Bavli, you cannot really find a source for this statement. And therefore, it's interesting that the Rif and Rambam again make such a statement. So Rambam clearly, not infrequently, follows in the Rif's footsteps, even when it is sometimes not so obvious that is the only way to understand the sugya. Shalosh sha'oth, just to explain the concept. We're talking here about sha'oth zamaniyot, as Rambam explains in his Perush on the Mishneh, for example. And this is basically a sun clock, a sundial, which is the simplest kind of clock in the world to construct and to understand and to follow, according to which 0 hours is sunrise and 12 hours is sunset. And the day, which is from sunrise to sunset, is divided into 12 equal parts. Each part is called a sha'ah. And they're called sha'ot zamaniyot because they're not fixed or fixed duration, but it changes according to the season. In some parts of the world, of course, it would be fixed. If you live on the equator, it would be precisely 60 minutes all year round.
Rabbi?
Yes.
With these halachot, how much wiggle room is there in terms of this money? Obviously, Chazal did not have atomic clocks.
Rambam is asked explicitly in one of his teshuvot a question with regards to this precise matter. He says, he asked the Rambam, when exactly is the Henes Ahama? And if you're not sure, if it's cloudy or something, what do you do? So Rambam, what do you think Rambam says to him? He says, Henes Ahama is when you think it is. You do the best you can with what you know. Today it's very easy to know, but people were also very much more familiar with with the way the sky looks. How if you look at the sky, the eastern horizon at a certain point, they could tell you very precisely how long till the sun actually rises, more accurately than we probably can, because they're very used to telling the time by looking at the sky, looking at the sun, at the shadows, all kinds of things. But you do the best you can. You do not. No one needs to have an atomic clock or a digital watch or anything of the sort. Nor should one rely on push things too much. You shouldn't wait to the last moment either. But these times are not based on the assumption that you can tell the time precisely down to the minute or second. That's not the case. Rambam goes on to say, Misha Higdim, this is now halacha Yud Bet or Yud Gimel, Misha Higdim v'kara Kriyat Shema shel Shaharith. Ahal she'amud hashahar. Let's say a person got up early and read Kriyat Shema early. He didn't wait till he got till the sun rises, or near the time of the sunrise. He began to read Kriyat Shema, shall we say, 40 minutes before the sun rises, which means he's going to finish 35 minutes approximately before the sun rises. Misha Igdim v'kara Kriyat Shema shel Shaharith ahar she'arad amud hashahar af al pi she'hishlim kodem shetanes hahama yasad chovato. Yitzeh the chova. That's okay. It's mutar. Uv'sha'at hadachak kehon shaya mashkim laset laderech. Now, sometimes you may do this deliberately even. Lechatchila. Koreh lechatchila misher amud hashahar. In other words, if a person knows he has to go on a trip, he has to leave early, he has to make a flight, he has to make a train, whatever it is. In that situation, a person is allowed, according to what Rambam says here, lechatchila, to read, which is based on the Bar-Hayim Masechet Sukkah. You're allowed to do so. Misha alei amud hashahar. You can read Kriyat Shema shel Shaharith, and you'll say the chova b'diavad, at least. In that situation, you can do so lechatchila. Hakoreh ahar shalosh sha'ot bayom. He who read Kriyat Shema shel Shaharith after the first 3 hours of the day, that which is the first quarter of the day, measuring the day from sunrise to sunset. Afilu haya anus, even though he was anus, let's say he was ill. Lo yasad havat Kriyat Shema ba'onatha. You are not considered to have become the mitzvah bizmana ba'onatha, ela hare hu koreh v'torah. You are considered to be as someone who reads from the Torah, which is a tremendous mitzvah in and of itself, but it's not the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema. Here Rambam says something important, which is different from what is said in the name of Rav Hai Gaon, the Furash. Namely, that you can only recite the brachot of Kriyat Shema in the morning, ad sof zman tefillah. Seeing that the Geonim, as opposed to Rif and Rambam, that we haven't got to Hilchot tefillah yet, but the Geonim understood that Shaharit has to be davened by arba sha'ot, 4 hours, only 1 hour longer than Kriyat Shema. And if you did not recite the tefillah of Shaharit by that time, then you cannot recite it any longer till midday. You will have to daven mincha twice. Rambam does not think so. Rif does not think so. They believe that if lechatchila you say the tefillah shaharit by ad arba sha'ot, but the avad you can recite it till ad hasot, kedat chachamim b'mishnah. So that's a separate discussion, but that's the fact. Rambam here is telling, and Rav Hai Gaon says you can recite Birkot Kriyat Shema as long as you can daven tefillah, which means till ad arba sha'ot. After that you can't say it. Rambam says no, not true. As long as it's still day, mevarech lefanav ulacharei kol hayom. Afilu ehar v'kara ahar shalosh sha'ot. Even if it's after Zman Kriyat Shema, but the brachot are true. What you say is true. Whether you describe the beginning of the day, the morning, the light, the sun, that's all very true. Second of all, the other inyanim that you mentioned, the brachot, such as Yetziat Mitzrayim, and such as the bracha on the Torah, Birkat Torah, which is in Ahavat Olam. Right? Etc., etc. These things are important and are necessary and are chova. And even if you did not recite it with Zman Kriyat Shema, you need to recite it later in the day. So as long as, if for whatever reason a person didn't recite Kriyat Shema with the brachot in the morning, he can do so all day and perform the mitzvah of being koreh Torah, not Kriyat Shema, not koreh Kriyat Shema b'onatah, but koreh Torah with the brachot all day long. And I firmly believe that is halacha l'maaseh. That is also the opinion of the, what was his name, Rabbi Yehezkel, I think. Anyway, the famous Aharon, the Pri Hadash, he explicitly agrees with the Rambam on this matter, and I think that's Wadai correct. I didn't see any way of connecting Zman Kriyat Shema to Zman Tefillah. These are two separate mitzvot with their own different definitions and related concepts, and there's no Zman, no connection between these Zmanim at all. Tov, we shall end here. B'ezrat Hashem. Hiyu beruchim. Hizku v'yames levavchem kol hamyahalim l'Adonai. Shalom v'nisachon.